Put the whoosy on the whatsy. Attach the whatsy to the whoosy. Connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Making Records with Eric Valentine. I am currently traveling around here out in beautiful Dallas. Here, I guess I can actually... There you go. There's Dallas. Can you see all that? I don't know. So yeah, we're out running around. Mom's playing shows, so I'm doing this guerrilla style just on my laptop. So we'll see how this actually turns out. I think I actually even may be able to edit this all on the fly. I can just switch back and forth between, boom, questions, and then me. Look at that. That's kind of cool. So that's actually saved me some time. This is working out great. So yeah, you know, this will just be another installment of answering questions. I'm going to try, let's see if I can not look at my face, and I'll try and look at the actual camera here. And so, you know, it's the third round. We'll see how many I can get through. Last time I was trying to organize the questions and get rid of duplicates and stuff. If I start running into duplicates, I think I'll probably just edit them out or whatever. I just, you know, I selected everything in the comment section and pasted it into a document. I'm just going to start marching through them and see what happens. We're just doing this, you know, quick and dirty. So, so here we go. Let's just dive in. Let's see what we got. Okay, first question. James Kirsch asked, "Hi Eric, what advice would you give to someone starting out now as a producer in the record industry?" That's a good question, and I think there's been stuff like this before, but you know, I think it's always worthy talking about. You know, it's a moving target. It changed a lot from when I started. The one thing that I think holds true for any era of production is that, and I think now more than ever before, an emphasis on songwriting will absolutely pay off. And there's just so many examples of it. Whether you're talking about Phil Spector, he was, I think, one of the producers that really innovated the idea that a producer was more than just somebody there to organize a recording session, somebody that was massively creatively involved in the recording process, and you know, wrote a bunch of the songs and played instruments and arranged everything. Did, you know, had a huge contribution. So even in the early era, it was made a huge difference. You know, if you're actually contributing to songwriting. Now, because you know, the landscape has changed because of all the digital stuff, digital downloading, the actual recorded masters are not really as valuable as they used to be, as people stream them for very little and typically don't buy the masters. And so they've been devalued to a point that owning just a percentage, which would be considered producer points, of the recorded master is just not really that lucrative anymore. You know, I mean, I've witnessed the change myself. It's dramatic. It's a huge difference. So the part of it that is still pretty healthy is publishing. And so if you're involved with songwriting, if you really, you know, have a musical background and it's something that you really feel confident and capable with, man, I cannot recommend strongly enough to really focus on, emphasize, develop, you know, a skill in songwriting, so you can participate in that part of it in a meaningful way. You know, not just trying to get a percentage because you're in the room, but actually really contributing something and making songs better, and earning your percentage of a song if you're involved. You know, from the folks that I've worked with over the years, I would say the two that started off assisting me and then transitioned into being, you know, producers themselves. Matt Radosevich was one. We talked about it a lot, and I talked to him about emphasizing songwriting. He is a very smart, very shrewd guy, a very talented guy, and so he followed that, and it's worked out very well for him. And then the other really amazing, but now somewhat sad example is Mike Busby, because he passed away recently. But he also, started off as an assistant for me, and was far more, driven and business-minded than I ever was, and also recognized the importance of songwriting. And up until his recent passing, I mean, his career was absolutely meteoric because of his songwriting. If you're just producing alone in this day and age, I would say it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough. It's a lot of work with not even nearly as significant a return for the hours that you have to put in producing stuff. So I think if I hadn't emphasized that before, I think this was a good time to do that. Songwriting is so important. All right, cool, good question. All right, moving on here. Okay, so I had a peek at this. There's a multi-part question, so we'll start at the beginning here. Okay. Thanks for blah blah. Uses a pair of EQing. Okay, first, Eric Valentine impersonator. Okay, here it is. Are you aware that there was an Eric Valentine impersonator on the loose? I was working with the Ballas Huff Band on Hollywood Records. They're Dancing with the Stars coaches that got signed and released in one album in 2009. They told my partner and I a story of having worked with Eric Valentine, an Asian fella. His big thing was he'd stand with his back to the speakers and his hands cupped in front of his ears back toward the speakers. This was his listening trick. He had the whole band doing it. Try it. It's weird and fascinating. Fascinating way to listen. Anyways, he had them all believing he was you. They found out later, of course, he wasn't. You are. Not sure what else went down with this guy and who else he scammed, but apparently the word was you were sufficiently private enough a person back then that he got away with it for a while. They found out the truth, and it was all pretty funny. It was, yes, I am, there I am. I am aware that there was an Eric Valentine impersonator, and it was funny and surreal, but an incredible bummer for the people that he ripped off, and he stole a lot of money from people with my name. And this is an insane story, and I'm going to try and just kind of hit the highlights of it. I could talk about this thing literally for 2 hours. It was so incredibly crazy. That started when I was in Atlanta with the All-American Rechecks. At one point, I found myself on the phone with Larry King from CNN, and ended with, crazy, legal action and all kinds of insane stuff. So this is what happened. I was in Atlanta working with the All-American Rejects. If you've seen that episode, we talk about it in that episode that we just needed to get out of Hollywood for a little bit, and they had a place that they loved to hang out. They thought was cool. So we went to do that. While we were there, I got an email from my lawyer, and he said, "Are you aware that there's somebody impersonating you?" And I had no idea. And so he sent me this email that had a picture of him. Okay, I'm gonna edit right here because I think I actually might have this picture on my laptop. Hold on a second. So my lawyer says, "Well, check out this picture." And he sends me a picture. This was back in 2007, and I had a very slow connection. It took a while, so this picture is slowly coming down. And I just found a copy of it and still have it on my laptop. Let me see if I can find this. Oh, okay, yeah, it's right here. So there he is, kind of hiding behind this record plaque that he stole out of my studio. He stole this Shrek record plaque out of my studio. And so what happened was that guy, whose name is Louis Atkinson, is the adopted brother of a longtime dear friend and longtime studio manager of Barefoot Recording, Trevor Atkinson, or he was credited as Trevor whatever. And this guy, Louis, was a just straight up career con artist. It's what he did. It's how he made his living, if you could call it that. And at one point, oh man, this story is so long and it's so crazy. I went to Florida to visit with my sick uncle. He was in the hospital. There was a condo there that Trevor's family owned, but it turned out it was more Louis used it, and so he met me there. He found out who I was and what I did, and immediately put him on his radar as somebody to scam. It started shortly after that, and so he started scamming people with my name, saying that he was me. And the reason it finally got back to me, so what he would do is he would find people that were on the fringe of the record business, and so people typically that had money on their own and were into making music or making records more as a hobby than doing it with a major label or whatever. And so they had a lot of resources available, and would try and throw around money to hire people, and those were the folks that he would prey on. And so the reason he got in trouble is because he got too bold and tried to do it on a project that was actually signed to Hollywood Records, a label that my band, T-Ride, was signed to in the 90s. And so he started working with the band, and what I heard was that he started doing all this weird money stuff where he was asking the parents, and so this was Derek Huff and Mark Ballas from the show Dancing with the Stars, two amazingly talented guys, obviously incredible dancers, but also really incredible singers and musicians and all of that. And so he started hitting up their parents for money, and the parents went and contacted the record company and said, "What is up with this guy Eric Valentine? He's asking us for money. Are we supposed to pay him? Like, what's going on?" And so then the record company contacted my manager, and that's when he found out and contacted me while I was in Atlanta. And of course, my manager told Hollywood Records, "Well, my guy's not even in Hollywood. He's in Atlanta right now. So who is this guy saying that he's Eric Valentine?" And that's when everything blew up. So it was not hard for me to contact him because he is, my studio manager's adopted brother. So I got his phone number, and as soon as I saw the picture, I knew who he was, and I was aware of how he had tortured Trevor. He had been stealing Trevor's identity for almost his entire life, and countless horrific things to him. Totally destroyed his credit. Like, it was just heartbreaking to see what happened to Trevor at the hands of this guy. And so my lawyer called him with a very threatening phone call saying, "Hey, we know what you're doing. Stop it, or you're going to get in a ton of trouble. It's illegal. Don't do it. Just stop it." So we thought that was the end of it, that he would just go for something else, where he wasn't found out. But that didn't happen. A couple years later, all of a sudden, I got an email out of the blue from this young gal who was a songwriter, was working on a record with Sean King. This was, at the time, Larry King's wife. And she enjoyed singing and wanted to make a record. And it was the perfect, circumstances for, a scam artist like Louis, who also occasionally went by the name Lathan. So he's Louis Lathan, and then started using my name. So sometimes he would call himself Lathan Valentine or Eric Valentine or whatever. A lot of different names he would use. So there he went. He got wind of it and swooped in on that and started producing that. And so this girl found out, people would get suspicious very quickly because he really just didn't know what he was doing, and doing things like turning his back to the speakers and cupping his hands over his ears as some sort of magical trick to really be able to hear what's going on. Oddly enough, when I was younger, I had a salesperson at a pro audio store tell me that that's the real way to listen to speakers. I don't know how that started. It's totally moronic in every way, and there's only one reason that you need to know that that's a stupid idea. Because nobody listens to music with their back to the speakers and their hands over their ears. So it's a perspective that doesn't matter. It's just totally moronic. So anyways, I never did that. I don't know why he thought I would do that or thought it was smart to say that he did that, or I don't know, whatever, doesn't matter. So then what ended up happening, I was like, oh my God, this guy's doing it again. I really have to stop him. I hired lawyers, and so I needed to try and serve him papers to know that there was an injunction being filed against him that would make it illegal for him to use my name. And I also should mention, like in the question, the reason he was able to do this was because I was very, very private. I was really not into having any pictures or video of me in the studio, anything like that. When you search my name, there's literally, so in 2007, 2009, there were 0 pictures of me on the internet, except for maybe a couple things about T. Ryan. You couldn't find anything. I enjoyed being a behind-the-scenes guy, and was just happy to stay there. And so it made it very easy for him to say that he was me, because nobody had any idea what I looked like in 2007 or 2009. So that was a big part of it. So then I was in this position of having to try and convince people like Sean King that the person they were working with was not Eric Valentine, and that this person that they had never met, me, who was calling them on the phone, was Eric Valentine, but to not tell him, because it was really a crazy chess game that I had to play, where I would cold call these people, and so it was like Sean King and Sean King's brother and a bunch of people that were all part of this whole, group of folks that were in Utah that were associated with the Osmond family because of Sean King's father, who was his manager. Like, it just goes on, and he was scamming Sean King's father with this big real estate investment. It's so insane, this whole thing. And so I would call Sean King and say, hey, you don't know me, but my name is Eric Valentine. The person that you're working on this record with is not Eric Valentine. And hope that she would believe me and not go and tell him, because as soon as he knew that I was onto him again, he would just disappear. He's a super slippery dude. And so I needed to convince these people to trust me in one phone call. And I pulled it off. I was able to get people to trust me on the phone, and was able to sort of triangulate where he was going to be. I did some questionable stuff to try and pin down when he was going to be at an airport. I basically became my own private detective, and got a very overzealous, overachieving process server that thought he was Magnum PI to help me out. He was incredible, and served him papers in the airport at Utah. And so that was pretty much the last of him really significantly using my name to try and scam people. He is sadly still scamming people to this day, and every year or two somebody will call me and say, hey, are you Eric Valentine? I heard that you got scammed by, or he was using your name, by this guy Louis. And there's just another person recently. It was like this Australian guy, businessman, that was into, precious metals, and, had all these companies for digging up metal. And then there was this other woman whose name I can't remember, who was part of the Lingerie NFL League, or whatever that is. And so, they would just keep popping up with people. And so, like, after I served him papers, then we actually put out stories in the press to say, hey, this happened. And then there was a bunch of other stories. If you search it on the internet, you'll see that he ripped off Hulk Hogan's son, all kinds of different people out there. It goes on and on. The guy is the worst. He's just the worst. Sad thing is like, he's a very charming, and probably in some ways a very talented guy, and he's just using whatever charm and talent he has to lie and steal from people. He could probably actually just be honest and do some really wonderful stuff, but he has not chosen to do that. At some point, it's really going to catch up to him in a bad way. But man, is he slippery. I don't know if he's been caught yet, but goes on and on. The FBI got involved. Like, it's insane. So I think that's about as much time as I should spend on it, because it's just too ridiculous and crazy. And honestly, all the details are so bonkers. I can go on forever. But Yeah, there you go. It's true. Super crazy and surreal. Not long after that, Undertone Audio started as a company, and my days of obscurity were ending anyways, and so now it would be very difficult for somebody to impersonate me. Nobody looks as goofy as this. So yeah, I think I'm safe now. But there you go. There's a good portion of that crazy story. Okay, so let's see. Let me get back to the questions here. Okay, ethics question. I like it. Okay, so here, let's get all this in there. How is it not stealing when you use a drum sample from an Ice Cube record or any other? Given it's technically part of a master someone else owns, but also the artistic ethics of it, for lack of a better term. I don't mean this to come across as douchey or accusatory. I'm no saint, but more as a question about a subject that I feel is an important one for us all to ask ourselves as engineers, mixers, producers, especially ones who can influence up-and-comers. I've personally become a bit of a zealot about making, using, and encouraging others, if they can, to use their own drum samples, apart from maybe 808s or blah, blah, blah. It's one of the more easy ways to fight back against the growing trend, epidemic, of the recording arts killing, or at least wounding, homogenizing that is running rampant in modern recordings. The control and power we have in the digital domain has created a slippery slope, one that touches on the deepest aspects of art and ethics. The analogy I use is this. Imagine for a second if plastic surgery was as easy and painless as digital editing and preset and drum sample use. Everyone would likely soon have the same lips, same ass, the same nose, same kick, same snare. We'd all look like whatever today's definition version of beauty is. It would homogenize us. And this is what is happening more and more in recorded music. Your thoughts on above? Okay, I mean, there's aspects of this that, let me get back here. There I am. There are aspects of this that I do agree with. I mean, technically it is stealing. And, I've done a lot of it. I've used a lot of drum samples in the productions that I've done. And everybody has to draw this line where they're comfortable with it. And sampling a drum sound, obviously, I'm comfortable with. I don't feel like it entirely, creates a whole new music experience, just a drum sound on its own. And I think I'm recognizing the reality of that more and more. The more I do this, that a drum sound alone does not make an amazing song. There certainly have been great drum sounds that help, grab people's attention and are certainly a part of contributing to a great song. But without a great lyric and a great singer or great other things, I'm not sure that it really matters. I don't know that anybody other than DJs or other record producers have ever bought a CD full of just drum samples. It's just not that interesting to listen to. And so, I think it's below the threshold for me. I'm sure there's a lot of people that disagree with that. Clearly, you're, not feeling entirely comfortable with it, even though you may have done it at times. So, it's a tough question. I don't know if where I've drawn the line is really the right place or not. I've been okay with it. I've learned so much from being able to pull those sounds into a production and see how they sit, with instruments that I've recorded, and it informs so much when I'm trying to design my own sounds. And so it's been really, really valuable just for me learning my own recording techniques. So for that aspect of it, it's been really inspiring, and I think it's inspired me to, come up with my own stuff. And honestly, on the stuff that I've done recently, I'm using 0 drum samples, none whatsoever. There's not a single drum sample on Grace's album. If there is, it's a sample of the sound that's in the song. And so, that was recorded for the song. So, and so I've gravitated away from it on the stuff that I'm doing now. But if a project, asked for it, I'd certainly still do it. one of the downsides, if you wanted to be purist about it, or very ethical about it, and not use drum samples, I think it would limit your options for types of music that you can sort of competitively work on. If you're, trying to compete with other producers or track makers or whatever that are using samples, and it's really integral to that genre of music, you're going to have a tough time. That is an incredible tool to give up for certain styles of production, and I think you would really struggle to keep up if you couldn't make use of that very, very powerful tool. The one part of what you're saying that I don't necessarily agree with, I think on its face it seems like it would homogenize the sound of things, but I don't think it does, because art in general evolves. It has to. It's just the nature of the human attention span. And so there's a certain point where once everybody has heard a particular thing enough, and there's tons and tons of examples of when a particular thing comes out that's very, very popular and people get inspired or influenced by it. You'll hear a lot of stuff that comes out that sounds very, very similar to it. It essentially at a certain point sort of kills it off and everybody moves on. And the same thing will happen with samples. It'll get used everywhere. It becomes too ubiquitous and becomes old news, and the shelf life ends, and everybody moves on to something else. And so I don't think that it's really going to turn into everything sounding exactly the same. There are certainly genres that sound very much the same. I've done I don't know if you've done this recently, but put on like the top 10 pop songs on Spotify and let them play. They do all kind of sound exactly the same. They all have the exact same 808 sort of drum program part, at the same tempo and so forth. But that's what's happening right now in 2019, And so in 2020 or 2021, everybody's going to move on to something else. And, it'll pass. It happened, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, in every era. There were times when a particular genre got very popular. All the songs would sound the same on the pop radio list because everybody was running towards it, and then eventually it gets boring and people move on. So music will continue to evolve whether we're sampling or not. I'm not worried about that part of it. All right, let's see what else we got here. Okay, day in the life. Give us a rundown of the typical day for you, or at least your desired typical day. Our habits make us who we are on some level. You're clearly driven, disciplined, organized, business-minded, talented, artistic, yet into family, etc. What's your best day look like? I.e., hours spent mixing, creating, tweaking, hours spent chilling out, hours spent on business, hours spent with family, eat, sleep, wake up. Give us the rundown. Curious. That's a good question. My daily experience is very, very different from day to day, which I really, really love. Even in the era when I was working in the studio every day, it felt different every day. Because I was very, very much always trying to work on different types of music, different types of bands that would make the experience different for me, and different stages of the process were always different. So it's an ever-changing thing. But I think sort of the valuable part of the question is what is my ideal day, and so we'll go there. And I like to start the day with some sort of exercise. We are fortunate enough to live in this beautiful place, Topanga Canyon. From our house, I can just walk to beautiful hiking trails. So a lot of times I'll get up and go for either a bike ride or a walk in the morning. I just find that getting my blood moving in the morning just sort of oxygenates my brain and gets everything started, and so I'm just ready to go for the rest of the day. So I love to be able to start that way. I can't always do it, and it's really wonderful to be able to spend that time with Sagan in the morning. So I have a setup where I can take him on my bike, or I'll take him for a hike and put him in a carrier. and spend that time with them in the morning. That's kind of my favorite. More recently, I haven't been able to do that as much because I've been trying to keep up with stuff, undertone stuff, and so I've been using the mornings to get on the computer before Sagan and Mom are awake and try and crank out a bunch of work stuff. But we're talking ideal here. So ideally, I get up with him and we go and do something outdoors. And then I still really enjoy doing something creative every day. And so if there is something to work on, like a mix or whatever is happening, I love being able to do that for a portion of the day. It's really, really just engaging my brain in something. It's just still super satisfying. It's like an itch I have to scratch each day. So I love that. And then now, since we have a family, we're all hanging out together, it's important to me to be totally done with all of that stuff by dinner time. And one of our favorite things to do is to make dinner together. Grace is an insane cook, insanely amazing cook. She's never looked at a recipe in her life and doesn't own any measuring cups or devices or whatever. She just starts throwing things at pots and pans and stoves and stuff, and then amazing food comes out. And I've learned so much from her about how to cook. And so we love cooking together. We have a little garden, and so right now we have our lettuce is flourishing, so I'll go out and pick lettuce, and we have herbs, so I'll get some basil and stuff for what she's cooking, and we cook dinner together and usually finish off with some sort of movie or some sort of something series or something that we're enjoying. Watch a little something and go to bed. So that's usually the perfect kind of day for me. I think in the portion where I'm engaging my brain. If I don't have something to work on, the other thing that I will basically create something to work on, which is doing just like research stuff, just experimenting. And it was something that I did for myself very, very early on, where we had this little crappy recording studio. This was like in the T-Ride era. And I would record, maybe 4 or 5 days a week outside stuff so we could make some money and pay bills and get new equipment or whatever. But we'd always save 1 or 2 days a week to just experiment. And those were certainly in that era by far my favorite days, to just challenge myself to like, man, how do you get this sound, or how do you do that, or let me see if I can beat this mix or whatever, where nobody's like watching the clock or whatever, and just experiment. Like, that is my favorite stuff. When Jason Slater and I were hanging out, we used to call it R&D days, research and development, and so the R&D days were absolutely the funnest. If you can somehow shoehorn that into your schedule, I can't recommend it enough. It's how you grow and evolve as an engineer or mixer or producer or whatever, to have those days to experiment without people sort of breathing down your neck. So I hope that answered the question. Really interesting question. That was very cool. All right, moving on here. Yeah, there's a quick comment about he worked on a song that I mixed for Hey Violet, which is cool. Yeah, that was a fun project to work on. I think it turned out nice. Okay, here we go. Adam Watts. Cheryl. Oh, this is the same person. Sorry. Dave Wessner. This might not come out as a question, but would love it if you could describe how you deal with latency going in and out of Pro Tools. I would have guessed that you use Pro Tools Ultimate, which would take care of most of the latency issues and not require much of a comment from you. But from looking at your screen, it looks like you might be using the mid-tier Pro Tools. Used to be called Pro Tools Native. Not sure what it's called now. I have this mid-tier Pro Tools here, and sometimes when combining outboard and plugins, Pro Tools doesn't do the math right, and things get weird. Thanks. Appreciate all this info. Yeah, that's a good question. Latency in the computers is a gigantic pain in the butt. And it drives me nuts, because I came from the analog world where everything moves at the speed of light and it all stays in time. As long as you're playing back off the right head of the tape machine, things never get out of time. And this thing of having my recording device always losing track of the timing of things makes me insane, and I hate it. So for me, when I'm tracking, even when I'm using like a Pro Tools Ultimate HD rig, I use very minimal plugins, to keep the latency as low as possible. I think it's very disorienting for musicians to hear stuff get significantly latent while they're tracking. And if they're monitoring through the computer, if you have a bunch of plugins on there, man, it gets late. So I just minimize as much as possible. I'll use just the the built-in Digidesign EQ3 because it has very, very little latency, and typically I won't compress at all. I don't use any like Soothe or any of these things or gates that have look ahead that introduce a massive amount of latency. I just don't use them while I'm tracking. The other problem is that while recording, let's say I do want to EQ stuff on the drum kit, when you're actually in record, it cannot compensate because it can only do delay compensation once you're playing back. And so that means, so what I do is I basically just come up with a generic collection of plugins on every track, and I put the same thing on every track, so they don't get out of time and out of phase with each other, because it can really affect the choices that I'm making about phase selection on microphones or placement of a microphone if the timing is off, that I'm monitoring. So I make sure that all of the tracks are equally latent on what I'm actually listening to in the control room. So there's that. One thing, hey, I'm going to ask this question to you all. Has Pro Tools figured out how to deal with latency on sidechaining and plugins yet? Because as far as I can tell, it hasn't. It's a disaster. It's never worked for me. They have this selection in the preferences that you can hit the button and go, yeah, compensate for stuff, and it still just never works right. I like to sidechain gates, I like to sidechain compressors, and you can just, like, if there's a lot of latency in the session or a lot of plugins on the track that you're using, it's so far off, it'll be thousands of samples off, just depending on the circumstances. Clearly, it's not doing it right. Maybe they've fixed that. I just stopped checking at a certain point because for years, I don't know how long, it's never done it right, so I just don't trust it. So a lot of times what I'll end up doing is if I really need to key like a kick drum or something, and I have a source track where I've gone and edited out all of the interfering noise, so it'll key perfectly every time, or the gate will open perfectly every time. What I have to do is on the track that is being gated, that has the bus being sent to it as an external trigger, I put it in audition mode on the gate plugin so I can hear the actual external key input source coming in, and you'll hear how latent it is compared to the original signal. And then I'll just slide around my edited key source track so it's actually in phase with the original thing. It works, and I end up having to do it kind of towards the end of the mix, because what happens is if the overall latency of the session changes, or if the plugins change on the tracks that you're using, the gate on changes, then that offset changes. So it becomes like a moving target. It's an incredible pain in the ass. I'm just kind of stunned that they haven't got that right yet. Maybe they have, and I haven't checked recently. Hopefully they have. Sorry, Avid, if I'm talking out of line here. So there's that. Then there is the hardware latency thing. So that also is tricky. And so for now, we'll set aside the sort of glitchy, buggy stuff where I have experienced that, where at times all of a sudden everything has just gotten out of sync with each other and they're not lining up, and I just have to close the session and reopen it. I have experienced that with hardware inserts, so I know what you're talking about, but I don't know what to do about that. You've got to talk to Abbott about that one. But the ones that are predictable, that I think are addressable, that they do their best to compensate for the hardware, and they get it as close as they can, but it is not perfect. and I think for a couple of reasons. One of which is that maybe the resolution of the sample rate that they can adjust by is not fine enough to get it exactly in time. So all the way to the highest frequencies, it's totally phase accurate. And this becomes a real issue if you are doing parallel processing, which is not uncommon for an external compressor. So if you have an external compressor you really love the sound of and you want to parallel it with something in the computer. So let's say you have all your drums going to an auxiliary in Pro Tools, and you duplicate that auxiliary and then use a hardware insert to add a compressor that you're going to parallel with it. Even when you're using the Avid interfaces, the compensation that they do is not perfect. And so if you do the experiment, and so what you would do is create a new source track, put a signal generator on there, send pink noise to the drum bus. It would go to both of those auxiliary faders, one that doesn't have an hardware insert and one that does, and then put them at identical volume. Just loop the signal through in your patch bay or on your audio interface. Don't put the compressor on there because we want identical levels. And then you can take those two tracks and go to a third auxiliary, so bus those together so they're blending together, or you could even just put this on your main output. So if they're both sending to the main output, put a spectrum analyzer on there. I really like the one that's built into FabFilter Q3. And when you turn up both of those auxiliary faders at the same volume, you'll see at the very high end of the frequency spectrum, it's canceling out frequencies, and it'll be rolling off like up around 15, 16K, and so it rolls off pretty steeply up there. And so you'll start to hear it, at a certain point, because you just hit this sort of like ceiling where you can't get the high end to open up. And so I use this thing made by Eventide. It's called Precision Time-Align. And so I will put Precision Time-Align on the fader that has the hardware insert, because my experience has been that I actually need to delay it a tiny bit. And so what I do, Precision Time-Align can actually delay in smaller increments than a single sample. And so I will delay it until the frequency response is flat, and then everything will add up right. So that's the trick that I use for dealing with it. Obviously with different audio interfaces, that delay amount is going to be different, but I always check it, because now I have a variety of, I have an Orion, I have the Lynx Aurora, and so whenever I'm using any of those, either of those two interfaces to parallel with hardware as a hardware insert, I make sure that it lines up properly. I actually have presets now in my Eventide Time-Align thing, so if I'm hardware inserting with my Lynx Aurora, I call up the preset, it will offset it right, so all the frequencies all the way up to the top of the spectrum will be in phase and not cancel. So that's how I deal with it. All right, good question. Okay, here we go. The majority of the tracks that you'd be showing us were very well recorded, either by you or other engineers, and we see you always enhancing them a lot. But I'm sure time to time you must get some stuff to mix that was recorded in a questionable way, with the wrong mic badly placed, too much unpleasant noise, etc. It could be one of those kind of situations where the demo recording get the final mix because there's some magic there and nobody wants to mess with it. Anyway, my question is, besides retriggering drums and reamping guitar lines, could you please show us some of your favorite tricks? Yeah, this is a cool question. It probably, merits actually demonstrating. The place where I run into this the most is when I'm asked to mix live recordings. And so I would say like I mixed the Slash Live in Stoke DVD, and they had plenty of great resources. It's a great recording. They had tons of microphones everywhere, all over the place, so there's lots to work with. But it's not my stuff in my studio and doesn't have all of my sort of familiar properties, going into whatever was capturing it, and so it's a little more challenging, for me, and I have to navigate just what they got in the moment and try and make it work. And so, so that's a good example of me doing that. I think a lot of times for me, it just means that I have to wrench on things a little harder. And overall, the overriding thing for me always, if there's a particular sound that I just cannot get, so I'm trying all kinds of EQ moves and I'm compressing and, trying whatever stuff on there with reverbs or whatever. Those are the tools we have to work with when we're mixing. If I can't get there, it means that there's a harmonic imbalance in the sound itself. And a lot of times what I'm missing for me to get my equalizers and compressors to respond correctly is harmonic coloration, the harmonic coloration that I'm used to because I grew up working on tape machines. And so very, very often, if I'm really struggling with a sound, I will run it through one of my tape machines, and then all of a sudden, all of my equalizers and compressors will do what I expect it to. So that's kind of my magic bullet trick if I'm really stuck on something and I can't make it work. If I have the luxury, Grace did some live recording recently where I threw up very, very few microphones. You can check it out. It's this stuff that was recorded in Sioux Falls. There's a total of maybe 5 mics in the room, and everything. When I got those sessions back, I just recorded it on my laptop with an Orion Studio, 12 mic preamps in there. I was capturing some DIs and stuff just in case, but I ended up not using any of that. What I ended up doing is when I got back to Pangadice, I ran everything through my J37. And so basically did a round of pre-mixing before I did the final mix. And so I would take a particular track, like the one mic that was on the drums, run it through the J37, do some EQ, whatever stuff, and then capture it back into the computer. And then I would have something that was just more familiar for me to work with. So, on that project, there wasn't a lot of tracks. It was easy for me to do it. I had the time to do it. So everything ran through it, particularly her vocal. She was just on an SM7. Man, when it goes to the tape machine, it's a whole other galaxy of just this silky, beautiful sound for the lead vocal. So that's my magic bullet. Cool. Okay, moving on. Okay, dead rituals. I love the definition of a lot of the guitar work on your records. In particular, I'm impressed with the fact that even the higher gain guitars seem to have so much presence, yet they're smooth and round, lots of energy, without the fatiguing higher mids. In many modern rock releases, I noticed that there is often a trade-off where they try to achieve presence, but the electric guitars can sound very fatiguing and blown out in the higher mids. How do you approach creating consistently in-your-face guitars which sounds also really round? Hope it makes sense. Yeah, it's a good question. I've wrestled with guitar stuff a lot over the years. My ears seem to be very, very sensitive to high-mid frequencies, and I just hate it. Every time something pokes out in that range, I just want to turn the speakers off. And I think earlier in my career, I was probably too aggressively taming that range, and I think I've gotten better now at being able to capitalize on the energy that's held in that frequency, like from 1K to 5K. There's some really important energy that's carried in that frequency range that I think I've missed out on some earlier stuff that I've done. But for me, the real trick for getting that to work, and I started very, very early on, I found, this goofy Orban equalizer where you could get a super narrow slice of a frequency, a Q of 10 on that thing. And so I could go on an electric guitar track, and that's usually what's happening, is that somewhere between 2K and 4K, there's some whistly, horrible overtone that's just dominating and sticking out. And making it so you're not hearing the full sort of spectrum of the guitar sound. And so what I would do is just go in and by ear fish around for where that frequency was with the gain cut, and you just find the spot where all of a sudden that sort of annoying metallic ringy overtone would disappear, and this very balanced sort of big warm guitar sound would emerge because it wasn't being overwhelmed by this really harsh ringy overtone. And so I started with that, with an Orban EQ. Later I would use like a Massenburg EQ, which got a pretty tight Q, but still the Orban was kind of better. Then it got into dynamic equalizers that could grab frequencies more when they were an issue and let off when they weren't an issue. I used this BSS 901 Mark II or something like that. I think I'm remembering that. And then ultimately I made the Undertone Audio EQ to be the ultimate surgical, like real deal hardware Class A equalizer ever on the planet. That thing gets razor sharp cues, and I could go in and you know, tweeze out anything with that EQ. And so now obviously there's tons of plug-in equalizers that give you a Q of 100, you know, and so like early on it was Q10 from Waves that sort of started to carry that task of tweezing out stuff, and you've got, you know, tons of bands to work with and stuff. And so then, and now there's Soothe, which you don't even have to find the frequency. It finds it for you. It's incredible for that. And so there's a really cool move that you can do where you do a very broad boost in that range, you know, like around 1.5 or 2K or 3K, something like that, and then put Soothe after it to sort of tuck in the aspects that are sticking out. So you're adding the energy of that frequency range, but Soothe is tucking in the overtones that are sticking out too much. That's the fast way to get there. You know, you don't have to try and find them by ear yourself. But I think that's what you're hearing in the guitar stuff. It started for me way back in the 90s, you know, with the Orban EQ, and it's something that has always been important to me to just balance out the overtones in the guitar sound. A lot of times, you know, a guitar speaker, whether you're using a 10-inch, you know, combo or a 412 cabinet or whatever, there'll be these weird ringy overtones that are inherent in the speaker or the cabinet, or the angle of the microphone or whatever. Sometimes you can minimize them by just fussing with the mic position. But a lot of times, you know, I end up having to tweeze it a little bit with equalizers. So that's been the trick for me. Okay, Will Clark. Hey man, I'm planning to experiment with recording cymbals separately. This is not only to avoid cymbal wash, but to conserve inputs. With the latter goal in mind, do you think having a mono overhead for the drum portion would suffice, and subsequently stereo overheads for cymbals? Thanks. Love the channel. Cool, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. So, you know, on the Queen's record, which seems to be the most notable of the times that I've done this, we did it in a slightly more extravagant way where we had cymbal pads set up from an electronic drum kit, so while the band was playing, you could hear that. It's not really necessary. It was very helpful in that context because they were really actually kind of jamming live as a band, and, you know, the drum parts were not these like regimented composed things. They needed to kind of happen live in the moment. And so being able to just hear and have Dave Grohl just kind of like play drums the way he normally would was really helpful in that context. Not necessary. I've definitely done sessions where if I'm playing drums, I'll play the drum part and I'll just leave the crash cymbals off. I know it'll sound fine if I overdub it later. I don't need to hear it in the moment. It doesn't bother me. Sometimes I'll split it, so like record the hi-hat live with the drum kit, you know, maybe a little baffle or something to help manage it bleeding into other microphones, but then the hi-hat is a little more an integral part of the feel, and so it's nice to be able to play that live with the drum pass and just overdub crashes. So I've done that version of it. Or you can just do it, you know, no cymbals at all and just overdub it. And as far as the miking is concerned, you know, anybody that's been paying attention to me spazzing about one mic drum sounds, I love just a mono overhead on the drums. And I like to put it not over the drums because it gets a little too thin. It doesn't really pick up enough of the like lower body of the toms and kick drum, and so I move it over so it's looking in at the drum kit between a rack tom and a floor tom. And if there's a ride cymbal sitting there, I mean, obviously if you're overdubbing the cymbals, you can just take it out anyways, but I move the ride cymbal off to the right of the floor tom. You have to reach for it a little bit, but it gets it out of that position. That is an incredibly balanced place to put a single mic on a drum kit. It gets an equal helping of the rack tom and the floor tom. It's looking at the snare. It's sitting right over the kick drum. It gets tons of kick drum. In a cool way for me, actually. I kind of prefer the sound of the kick drum there, because if it's like, you know, too much on this side, it gets a little too clicky with the beat, beater hitting the drum. If there's a hole, I just don't like the sound, that clicky sound on a kick drum. Like I'm not recording speed metal at this point, so I don't I don't need that in my kick drum sound these days. I did it a little more earlier on, but it's cool because you're actually using the shell of the kick drum to sort of baffle that clicky attack of the sound, and you get a more of the sound of the drum in the room, I think, which is just more what it sounds like to me when I'm playing. So I prefer that. And so then, if I overdub the cymbals, you certainly can overdub it, and I think it'll blend in okay. Or what I've done is I use a mono overhead, the same mono overhead if I'm trying to be really sort of purist about it, and I can just pan it off to one side or the other, And if I have two cymbals set up, I'll pan it one way for one cymbal and pan it the other way for the other. So, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. I think one of the other things that I would recommend is, even on the Queen's record, it was very, very difficult for Dave Grohl to overdub the hi-hats and have them feel like they were part of the same performance. And that's one of the things that I really didn't dig about doing that on that project. And we started off trying to do it where he was overdubbing it onto an analog tape machine where I wouldn't be able to edit it. And I ditched that at a certain point somewhat discreetly because people were being sort of purist about recording everything into the tape machine and stuff. And at a certain point, it's like, I just want this to feel like fucking cool-ass music, and I don't care about whatever the purest thing is in the moment. It was also driving Dave Grohl crazy. There was a moment where he was just like, whose idea was this? This is insane, and it is insane, especially like with how complicated those drum parts were. So I switched to tracking him straight into the computer, and I edited the fuck out of those cymbals. The people that were involved in that project don't know that, but I did. And it wasn't editing to make everything so it would be perfectly in time. I was editing to make the cymbals sound like they were actually part of the same performance as the drum hits. And to me, like, there's no value in having the hi-hat out of time with the kick drum and snare drum. It just makes the whole performance sound unconfident and not sound like Dave Grohl playing drums. And so I made the decision to edit them to just make sure that the cymbals were tight with what he played originally and to actually have it sound like what he would actually really play. So that happened on that project. I don't know if anybody knows that, but they do now. So there you go. That's some things to consider. If you're overdubbing hi-hat, I would recommend making sure that it stays really tight with the drums, just so it sounds like what it would sound like if you actually just played it all together. So there you go. Okay, Angelo Baltini. There are lots of interesting ideas of yours floating around the internet regarding drum recording, single mic drums, double sub-kick recording, that LCR-ish idea on No One Knows, and of course the infamous drum problem. Would you care to go more in-depth on several of your techniques over the years and tell us when and why you would use them, and maybe more importantly, when and why not? Okay. I'm trying to think. I'm planning on doing some episodes that are very specific about the different eras of drum recording approaches that I've done. And there's sort of significant categories. There's the 90s sort of big rock stuff that I did that's represented in the Third Eye Blind record and probably made it into Good Charlotte and All American Rejects. And then there was a point where I got into this Underheads thing and that was like Lost Prophets, some other stuff around that time. And then there was the LCR thing, like the three, instead of just having two overheads, having, the three overhead thing. And now more recently is just super minimalistic, literally as few microphones as I can get away with. And so, I think the choices are so specific to the genre of music, and also to the player. If you have a player that has amazing control over the internal dynamics of the drum kit, and I can simply just ask them, hey, play the kick drum a little louder overall, play the snare drum a little quieter overall, and they'll just do that, then the whole one mic drum thing works amazing. You just eliminate so many phasing problems. I think ultimately it just has a lot more character and personality to it. It's just blending everything together in the space that it's being recorded in, and will sound more like its own unique thing. I mean, it's no secret that I love the sound of the records of the 60s and 70s, and so that's something that I'll always be drawn to, and using one or two microphones on a drum kit is a great way to get there. If you're recording somebody that's just bashing the shit out of the drums, then you're gonna need close mics. It's just, there's no getting around it. If I'm recording a monster like Mark in Taking Back Sunday, he plays insanely hard, and it's part of the power of what he does, and it's amazing, and I love it. There's no way I can record him with one microphone. It will never, ever, ever work, ever. And so you have to have close mics on it, and it's just a more involved process. There's more microphones to deal with when you're recording. There's more microphones to deal with when you're mixing. There's more mixing challenges involved with getting these mics that are like 1 or 2 inches away from the drums to sound like they're in a room, because you're not hearing that in those microphones. So ultimately, I feel like the big multi-mic thing, when I record bands like that, it's like 14 tracks or 14 or 16 tracks, something like that. It gets me where I need to go, but it's a lot more work. It's a lot of work. There's just a lot to wrangle. So I feel like this answer is a little bit incomplete, and I feel like the right context to go super, super in depth on this is when I'm actually setting up the drums. I'm planning on doing this at Barefoot, so you'll have like a drum kit set up, and we'll go through the whole thing for each of these different types of approaches, and we can really, really check it out and understand, what the benefits and drawbacks are. But that's a little bit. I hope that was helpful. Okay. Please rank the following in order of importance to a great sounding record. All right, this is a super funny question because you did it for me. I would put those three things in exactly that order. Microphones make a huge difference. The difference between recording a vocal with a Telefunken 251 versus an SM7 or an SM57 is a massive difference. Or let's say a ribbon mic, an RCA 77. So the microphone choice is a gigantic difference, and so the wrong choice can actually put you in a place where you're totally screwed, and you can't really pull the sound out that you need if you really make an egregiously bad choice. So by far the most important of those three. Preamps, a nice sounding preamp is good. I love the sound of the undertone pre's. I love tube preamps. I love the Altec, 1567 vibe. If you want that more sort of, heavy coloration tube saturated thing, they're beautiful for that. And sometimes there is sort of like a size and openness to the sound that you can get on those, on a really nice preamp that is a little harder to find if you're using like an M-Box or something like that. But it does not make or break a recording. I just mentioned that I recorded this live stuff on my laptop of Grace's band playing in this beautiful, huge, historic courthouse room. Had a like 5-6 second natural reverb to it. It sounds unbelievable in this room. And I just use the preamps in the the Antelope Orion Studio thingamajig. And so, my experience with those types of preamps is that they just sound kind of lifeless because they don't add any color. There's no transformers. I'm specifically choosing to not push them because, they're definitely not Class A. They don't have any of the sort of saturation characteristics that I look for in mic preamps. So basically, I just set very moderate levels, make sure nothing's going to come anywhere near clipping. Sorry, we got a lot of traffic noise here. Somebody's excited about the sound of their car. Yeah, I just capture everything to be as neutral as possible, and I find those preamps to be kind of invisible sounding, which is great. They're just missing the coloration that makes things sort of musical for me, but I can add that later. And so that's what I did. I just captured them as clean as possible with those very sort of invisible mic preamps, and then when I got back to my studio, I ran them through. I actually put them through on the way to the tape machine through an Undertone MPVI4, partly just to drive the level a little bit into the tape machine, but also to just add the transformers and stuff, and then it sounds more familiar to me. But it's a subtle difference. If I didn't do any of that and just captured it in a computer, mixed it out on my laptop, and put that stuff out for people to listen to, everybody would still get every part of the emotion of Grace's vocal that she delivered on that stuff. And it wouldn't stop people from feeling what happened in that room musically. And that's really where I draw the line. Is if it takes me out of the moment of being able to enjoy the emotion of what's being expressed in a performance, then that's a problem. If I can still feel what's being performed, then it did a great job, and I'm happy with it. So preamps or converters, even less important. Earlier on, I did a lot of A/Bing with converters, and I think I just didn't really know how to do those comparisons in a meaningful way. I'm going to do a more in-depth episode about comparative listening because my opinions about it have changed a lot over the years. When I started incorporating blind listening tests, that was when the reality about what really mattered and what didn't was revealed to me, and it changed my life. It totally changed my perspective on anything. Starting with oh my God, my ears have been lying to me forever, I have no idea what's going on, to, okay, now I really know what matters. And the thing that's been cool about it is instead of obsessing for hours and comparing a bunch of goddamn fucking digital converters, I spend the time that I have available focusing on things that are way more important, like microphones or microphone placement or the lyric in the song or the performance, and focusing on those things that matter so much more than a stinking digital converter. They just don't matter. I couldn't feel more strongly about it. I'm glad that there are people out there that are trying to make them as wonderful as possible, and they're great options. Like I've said, I use Avid HDX. I use the old generation of Lynx Auroras. I have a new Lynx Aurora. I have an Antelope Orion. I have Lavery Golds. They all sound great. I could use any of those and feel like people are going to be able to fully receive whatever emotion was being expressed in the music that's being captured. So I'm just not in this group of folks that's oh my God, this converter sounds so huge and wide and whatever and blah, 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 or if you don't use this clock, everything's going to sound like crap or what. It's total nonsense. And I would even say that I've proved it over and over and over again with blind listening tests, with people who adamantly claimed they would absolutely be able to hear the difference. And people who worked for the company that built the equipment came and took a blind listening test and failed. And so it's just been proven to me way, way too many times that it doesn't matter. So So there you go. That was a very impassioned response to your question. That's one I feel very strongly about, and so I'm going to try and do an episode about comparative listening. I think it's so important. I'm hoping it'll, be helpful for people, and I think at the end of the day, save a lot of time and a lot of money for people. All right. Okay. I hope I'm going to get this name right. Juhani Sinkonen. I hope that's right. Hi, Eric. Thanks for the channel. I've been soaking up information and inspiration for your videos like a sponge. Anyways, here's my question. I've noticed that you play a lot with timing and phase, but we never get to see you do it from the beginning of a project. Where do you start? How do you build a mix that has coherent phase relationships? Are all the tracks under your scrutiny, or is it mostly about drums and other multi-mic'd sources? Cool, good question. So I think there are specific places where the phasing becomes extremely important. So one of them, the gentleman or the person just mentioned, which is when you have a single sound source with multiple microphones or sources capturing it. The phase relationship between those is going to be really important. So that's going to be drums, and so when I'm recording, the phase relationship of the microphones is really, really important. I do really pay attention to that, and I don't just kind of hope that I'll be able to move things around and make it work later. I try and get everything as perfect as I can when I'm recording, with the time that's available or whatever the circumstances are. With the drum micing, bass guitar is another one where it's super, super important. The DI, the amp, if there's multiple mics on the amp, I try and make sure that stuff is sounding right. If I do need to, tweak it more later, I will and I can, but I try and get it right out of the gate. I mean, certainly there's plenty of incredible recordings that have been made without time adjuster in Pro Tools sliding stuff around, and so it is possible to get it right. And I remember I definitely probably I was a little more obsessive about it before I had more post-recording control over it. But even then, I would use outboard stuff to address some of these things, move the relationship of a micro, a room mic or something around with a TC Electronics 2290 digital delay that could give you tenths of a millisecond, increments. And so I did, used to do that even back in the 90s. But yeah, it's important right from the outset. I mean, for me, the goal is always, I want to just have everything go into whatever the recording device is, whether it's a tape machine or a computer or whatever, and have it be as close to being done as possible. And so I can just pull up my tracks, in the session or on a console, and just have everything sort of fall into place and not leave so much to question down the road that you find yourself in oh boy, this is not really adding up right at all. I mean, something about it really should feel right in the moment. And so then hopefully you get everything as close as you can, and then when you're mixing, when I'm not focused on other things, parts that are being played, performances, compositional stuff, whatever, and I'm just focused on the sound, then I can get really, really tweaky about it and make sure the downbeat obsession, just that everything is landing in this satisfying way. That's where the phase relationship between the kick drum and the bass guitar gets really important. If there's a downbeat of a chorus that doesn't feel right, first thing I'll do is I'll go and try and flip the phase of that first note of the bass guitar and see if that fixes it. If it doesn't, I'll flip it back and then start sliding it around and see if I can find a spot where it just adds up with a kick drum in a way that feels satisfying and heavy. And so what I used to have to do with the bass guitar, because I couldn't slide it around and phase flip one note, I would just keep having the bass player punch in at the beginning of the chorus until it felt right. And it was a total pain in the ass. So sometimes I'm definitely taking advantage of that, so I don't have to torture the musician with my obsession with that. I can torture myself with it in the control room. But cool, good question. Okay, here we go. The unidentified man. On most videos, mixing engineers receive the best tracks, and it seems like no effort to mix. I always wonder if there's a record which had good performance vocals, but was a bitch mixing. EQ and those damn S's. Nobody shows or talks about that, or even a song which was really hard to mix but turned out great, or you couldn't save it in the mix. Yeah, that's a good question. So one example that I could mention, it's getting darker here, it's going to get a little grainier. I'm outside. There's a song that I had to work on really hard, and I feel safe saying this because I talked to the fine gentleman that recorded it, and we were sort of clear about the circumstances that led up to it, and he was happy to have the help. It was the 5 Seconds of Summer song. Looks So Perfect, I think is the title that ended up on that song, the song about American Apparel underwear. So that song was a demo recording. It was a songwriting demo that Jake Sinclair did with the band, and it was a great song. It was the song that really sort of broke that band out. But they were really struggling getting a mix on that song, and because Jake is a badass engineer. He makes great records. But when I talked to him about it, and I asked him, and I said, I think I'm going to need to replace some stuff on this. I just want to check and make sure that you're cool with it. And he said, absolutely, do whatever you want to that thing to make it sound good. And he didn't really have the time, to do it. And so it was just a demo, and he was, I think, excited to have somebody really take the time to try and help make it sound as good as possible. And so I had his blessing. And so, that's something that happened on that song. And I worked really hard on that thing to get it over the goal line. That was a challenging mix. I worked on that for probably 2 or 3 days. I had me and the staff at Barefoot Recording singing gang vocals. We played drums. We did a bunch of stuff on that mix in places where I just couldn't pull it out of the tracks. There's definitely samples being used to help the drums, and I think I played some guitar on it because I think the guitars were all just like amp simulators, and there were no DIs to work with. May have just gone through outboard amp simulators or something. And so, the recordings were just not designed to be used on an album. And so there are certain mixes that come my way that I don't call mixes, I call them fixes. And this is, nothing, no judgment of Jake, because it was not a finished recording of his. And so, on those, I just do whatever is needed in order to get it over the goal line. I feel like in the computer now, the tools for mixing are so insanely powerful, with like the EQ matching thing that I showed recently, on the piano, to just endless EQing options, endless sort of like coloration options with distortion and harmonic color and compression. It's so powerful. I feel like you can kind of make anything out of anything in the computer. And so at this point, it's really more about like, it's not a question of, is it possible to get this to sound good or not? It's really a question of how much time do I have? Because given enough time, I think anything can be made to sound great. The computers are just that powerful. And so, yeah, it's really, I think it boils down more to just what kind of time you have. Maybe I'm planning on actually doing that 5 Seconds of Summer song, and so I can show what happened in that thing. Some serious wrenching went on there. So yeah, I feel like, we want to talk about very specific tricks or techniques for doing that. And a lot of times I think it just boils down to having the patience to go through and do the detailed work. You mentioned, having terrible S's. There's a limit to how far you can go with de-essers to fix some of that stuff. And so at the point where it starts to break down and de-essers will start to make it sound like the singer has a lisp, and it's horrible. I don't want to do that to anybody. And so I will go through and manually reduce the level of the S's by just editing the region and pulling down the volume on the region, so the de-esser is not working so hard, and it just puts it in a natural balance. And so it's things like that. If you take the time, you can fix anything in a mix, I think. So there you go. It's probably the answer is a lot of time. Okay, let's see what we got here. Okay, so this is a question. Can you break down some of the tracks you did with Grace Potter in the album Midnight? I would love to do that. I love that record. I know it was a bit jarring for her fans, but we loved making that record. We're very, very proud of it. I'm planning on getting to it at some point. I know it's been... oh, hi, there I am. It's been kind of a deluge of Grace's stuff recently because I'm so excited about her new record. So we'll take a break from it for a little while, and we'll work our way back there. I plan on doing this YouTube thing for a long time, and so I'm sure I'll get there. There's a few things on that record that I was just loved so much, and so I'd love to share it. So definitely. Okay, do you have any preference for particular cymbals for recording? Also drum heads, thanks, Phil. Okay, yeah, cool. Cymbals have been kind of tricky for me, and there's a couple specific things that I can mention that I really, really love. Some are a little more obtainable than others, but for all of the big rock stuff that you hear of my recordings, unquestionably, there is Paiste Signature Series full crashes. Those crash cymbals record beautifully. They're just this amazing, shimmery, airy high end, and I don't find them to be harsh and clangy. I just love the way mics capture those. And so, I've had 16, 17, 18 inch, even later on, like 19, 20 inch versions of Paiste Signature Series full crash. They're just beautiful recording. It's a bright cymbal, so if you're looking for that high energy, like crash riding in the chorus thing that happens all over, the Third Eye Blind record and All American Rejects and Good Charlotte and all that stuff, man, those cymbals are incredible for that. So I highly recommend those. Hi-hats are a little trickier. I have a pair of 60s vintage, I guess they're just Zildjian A 15-inch hi-hats that were amazing. One of them got cracked at a certain point, and I used them on so much stuff because they were just like half the volume of all the other hi-hats, and they were really nice and dark and smooth sounding, and just super airy and beautiful. And so one of them got cracked, and so now I paired the one that still is alive with the thinner of the two Giant Beat 15-inch hi-hats, and so I've been using that. That's what's on Grace's whole record. And so I enjoyed those. I have had other people come in that bring in cymbals that sound totally incredible to me, and like Matt Musty has an incredible cymbal collection. Let's see. I'm trying to think of the other drummers that have brought in stuff that have totally blown me away. Why can I not think of his name right now? He's like one of my favorite drummer. I just saw him play live. Matt Chamberlain. My God, that guy has some good cymbals. Yeah, he knows how to pick a cymbal. This question should probably just be forwarded to him. And so I don't know what it is he's using exactly. I'm sure it's a combination of some vintage stuff and some new stuff. But man, beautiful sounding cymbals. But there's a couple things to run with. Hopefully that helps you. Okay, any plans of streaming content? I know of folk like... Okay, this is Tagwin Slater Bennett, sorry. Any plans of streaming content? I know of folk like Herman Lee of Dragon Force who stream on Twitch TV, and I think you could easily find a community there. I guess I'm not sure exactly what that's a question of. Is that live streaming? Maybe I'll do a live stream of something. I haven't really considered that. If that's what you're asking, And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's really a benefit in that. I kind of do this with scraps of time that I have available, and so it might be harder for me to organize the time to do that. But I don't know. I'm up for anything. So let's see. I'm going to turn off this light and see if I can. How's that? Is that any better? It's still grainy. Grainy is all graininess. All right. Actually, I think that made it even more grainy. I don't know. Let's see. How long have we got here? Got an hour and a half. Okay, we'll wrap it up soon here. It's getting hard to see what's going on. Okay. Okay, John Roberts. Hey, Eric, what is your secret for staying creative and powering through working on a song you don't particularly love or even like in some cases? Boy, that's a tricky question. I think I've been super lucky. There was definitely a time earlier on. It's probably more relevant to the earlier era of recording, when I was just a guy for hire with a studio, and I would record anybody or anything that would pay the hourly rate. And for me, and I guess it does relate to some, more current stuff. There's no secret. I'm very open about, my influences and, what has inspired me. I love Led Zeppelin, and, if I had my choice, I'd record stuff like that every day. But, that would get kind of boring. And so, I always try and find things, within the song or the genre that I'm working in that I can invest myself in. And so it's definitely, I think, me trying to record a song that I don't like is that is a gamble, because if I don't really connect with the song, the chances of me really getting it right and having everybody else connect with it are definitely diminished. I've definitely been able to sort of put myself in the position of like, okay, I'm recording songs for little, pop band. I recorded like Jonas Brothers, and that song, I did the song Year 3000. That song was not designed to speak to me, as an adult, whatever, record producer, opinionated dude that loves Led Zeppelin. That song is not designed to appeal to me. It's designed to appeal to young kids. And so I have to put myself in the mindset of a young kid, a 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid. At the time, I'm guessing, they were on Disney Radio, and that's probably who was really freaking out for that. They were quite young. I think, let's see, the youngest of the three, he was probably 14 or 15 years old at the time when I did that song. And so, I try to tap into that very youthful, innocent, playful energy that young kids have, and make sure that I'm delivering something that is going to really connect with that. And even though it's not for me personally, I think, I can objectively anticipate what is going to be exciting to a listener like that. And that becomes the challenge for me. It's like, I don't really care what type of music or whether the song speaks to me or not or whatever. I want to do the best version of it possible. I want to make the funnest, most playful, innocent but awesome and exciting, energetic song for a 10-year-old kid on the planet. If that's what I'm being asked to do, then I want to try and nail it. And so I'm not sure that it's really as important for me to have it really speak directly to me. So I think that's a big part of it, try and put yourself in the shoes of the person that song is designed to speak to, and become an expert of what they're going to love, and try to deliver that to them. You have to. It's sort of some role playing going on there, but I think that's what's helped make it work for me. And ultimately, even if the song emotionally doesn't speak directly to me, I still have the technical side of it that I always find inspiring, is always fun for me. On Year 3000, I want this to sound incredible. I want it to come on and go like, there's never been a little kid song that sounded like this, I don't know if I did that or not, but that's at least what I'm shooting for. I want to blow people away with it, I don't care who it's for. And so, that's what's important to me, and it doesn't really matter what else is going on. That's just me satisfying myself. I'll always be passionate about it. So there you go. I'm totally not visible at this point because it just got dark out, very dark. Okay, you can barely see me smiling there. But there's another round of answering questions. Thank you again so much for the amazing, thoughtful questions. I'm going to keep going through this. I'll mark where I left off, and I'll do another round, and I'll get caught up with this at a certain point. I see that people are not totally sure where to put questions. I'll round them up, and I'll just keep cranking through them and try and answer everything. If I didn't actually type in a response online, I'll make sure and hit it with one of these rounds. So, all right, thank you again. I'll see you next time. Bye.
You put the whoosy on the whatsy, attach the whatsy to the whoosy, connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit go. You hook the gidget to the gadget, adjust the gadget to the gidget, unhook the dingly-dang from the diddly-doo.